Imagine it's the night of June 15th, 1826. The air in Istanbul is thick with an unspoken tension, a silence that feels heavier than any storm. Inside the magnificent Topkapi Palace, a single room holds the future of an empire. Here Sultan Mahmud II stands over a massive map of Istanbul, its surface flickering under the soft glow of candlelight. The light catches the determined lines on his face, a ruler poised on the brink of a monumental decision. Surrounding him are his most trusted commanders, the leaders of his new, modern army, the Asakir-i Manshuri Mohammadi, which translates to the victorious soldiers of Mohammadi. Their faces are grim, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. Through the grand window of the imperial pavilion, they can see the distant lights of the Janissary barracks. For centuries, these barracks housed the elite fighting force of the Ottoman Empire. Tonight, they are a target. This is the story of the Auspicious Incident, the night a 600-year-old institution met its fiery end. The Janissaries, once the symbol of Ottoman power and the terror of European armies, had become a shadow of their former selves. They were no longer the disciplined warriors who conquered continents. Instead, they had grown into a corrupt and rebellious political force, a state within a state. They interfered in politics, dethroned sultans who dared to challenge them, and fiercely resisted any attempt at military reform. For Mahmud II, who dreamed of modernizing his empire to survive the challenges of the 19th century, the Janissaries were the single greatest obstacle. He knew that for the Ottoman Empire to live, the Janissary Corps had to die. The journey to this fateful night was long and perilous. Mahmud's own cousin, Sultan Salim III, had tried to create a new army, a Nizam-e-Jadid, or new order. The Janissaries saw this as a direct threat. They revolted, deposed Salim, and ultimately had him killed. Mahmud, who was just a boy at the time, witnessed this brutality firsthand. It was a lesson he would never forget. When he ascended the throne, he knew he had to play a much longer, much smarter game. He spent years carefully consolidating his power, placing loyalists in key positions, and secretly building the foundation for his new army. He couldn't just declare the Janissaries obsolete. He needed the support of the people, the scholars, and the religious establishment. This is where the scene in the palace becomes so crucial. On the table next to the map lies a document of immense power, a religious decree issued by the Sheikh-ul-Islam, the highest religious authority in the empire. This fatwa declared that it was the duty of every Muslim to support the Sultan's new army and to fight against those who resisted reform. It wasn't just a political move. It was a sacred command. The new army was framed not as a replacement, but as a righteous force for the good of Islam and the empire. This gave Mahmud the moral and legal high ground. On that same table, two flags tell the story of this transition. One is the old, tattered banner of the Janissaries, a symbol of a glorious but now decadent past. Beside it lies the fresh, new standard of the Manshur army, representing hope, progress, and a new beginning. On the wall, a curious drawing hangs a sketch of a Janissary. This wasn't just a random piece of art. The Janissaries were famous for their elaborate tattoos, including symbols on their ears. It was a subtle, almost menacing reminder of who they were dealing with, a visual representation of the deep-rooted culture he was about to excise from the empire's body. As the commanders gathered around the map, they weren't just receiving orders. They were participating in a ritual. One by one, they drew their swords and swore an oath of loyalty to the Sultan and the new army. This wasn't just a military briefing. It was a pact sealed in steel and honor. They were committing themselves to a bloody and uncertain task. Many of them had once served alongside the very men they were now preparing to destroy. The mood was somber, heavy with the weight of history. Then came the moment of decision. Mahmud II, his face a mask of iron resolve, extended his hand, pointing from the palace across the Golden Horn directly toward the Janissary barracks. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the force of an imperial decree that would echo through centuries. It was the signal. The operation was to begin. The time for plotting and planning was over. The time for action had come. The plan was cunning. Mahmud had intentionally provoked the Janissaries. He had announced that his new army would be incorporating European-style drills and tactics. As expected, the Janissaries fell for the bait. Outraged, they poured out of their barracks into the hippodrome, the ancient heart of the city, overturning their soup kettles in a traditional sign of revolt. The kettle was sacred to the Janissaries. To overturn it was to declare war on the Sultan himself. But Sultan Mahmud was ready. Unlike his predecessors, he didn't hide in his palace. He unfurled the sacred banner of the Prophet Muhammad, calling on the citizens and religious students of Istanbul to rally to his side. Thousands answered the call, furious at the Janissaries' constant disruption and arrogance. Suddenly, the rebels found themselves isolated. They were no longer the heroes of the people. They were the enemy. As the first distant boom of a cannon echoed through the palace walls, the commanders in the room knew there was no turning back. The artillerymen, loyal to the Sultan, had been secretly positioned. They opened fire on the Janissary barracks with devastating accuracy. The wooden structures, home to thousands of soldiers, were quickly engulfed in flames. The barracks became a death trap. Those who were killed by the cannon fire were consumed by the inferno or cut down as they tried to flee. The fighting raged through the night and into the next day. The hippodrome, a place of games and public gatherings, became a battlefield strewn with bodies. The new Manchur army, disciplined and well-armed, systematically hunted down any remaining Janissary resistance. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly final. The fires burning in the distance, visible from the palace window, were not just burning buildings. They were a funeral pyre for an entire military class. For 600 years, the Janissaries had been the makers and breakers of sultans. In one single violent night, they were erased. Historians estimate that thousands of Janissaries were killed in the initial assault, with thousands more executed or exiled in the following weeks. Mahmud was merciless. He abolished the corps by imperial decree, confiscated their property, and even banned their name from being spoken in public. The Bektashi order, the Sufi dervishes who had served as the Janissaries' chaplains, was also outlawed. It was a complete and total purge. This event was officially named the Vaka-i Hayriye, or the Auspicious Incident. For Mahmud and the reformers, it was a moment of liberation. The greatest obstacle to progress had been violently removed. The candlelight in the palace that night truly symbolized a new dawn of enlightenment and reform for the Ottoman Empire. The map was no longer just a plan. It was the blueprint for a new future. The Auspicious Incident cleared the way for the Tanzimat reforms, a period of intense modernization in the military, administration, and society. It was a brutal but necessary step for an empire struggling to survive in a rapidly changing world. But it also came at a cost. The destruction of the Janissaries, while necessary, left a military vacuum that took years to fill. The empire was vulnerable, and its enemies took notice. Looking back at that scene in the Topkapi Palesta Sultan, the map, the two flags we see more than just a military coup. We see the clash of old and new, tradition and modernity, order and chaos. Mahmud II's decision that night was a gamble of epic proportions. He bet the future of his dynasty and his empire on a single, violent stroke, and he won. The last night of the Janissaries was the first day of a new Ottoman era, born in fire and forged in the unyielding will of a sultan who dared to change the course of history. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into history fascinating, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this, and let us know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to explore next. See you in the next video.